The following is a Comfortably Zoned Radio Network production.
Thank you, Tally Olson. I am back, and you are comfortably zoned with me, the Zig Zag Man, in Alameda, California, right across the bay from San Francisco, across the moat from Oakland, in, I would say, the best state in California. How about that? Got to say that because my guest is from New York. I'm from New York. We both lived out here most of our lives, and I'm honored to have him. Howard Harawitz, it's been a long time since I've been trying to get you as a guest. How are you?
Oh, doing fine. It's wonderful living here. We're right across the street from a beach. We get out for exercise, and we just had a nice breakfast on the estuary. So can't complain at all.
You still have your New York accent, which is nice. You've been out here longer than me. I got out here in 1966. The Air Force brought me kind of involuntarily at the time, but I had to beat the draft, so I joined, and it worked out. I was stationed in California, and you are a few years ahead of me chronologically, if I might add. I'm from 1946, the 1946 edition of Baby Boomers, as a matter of fact. What brought you to California?
Well, I was a graduate student in Pittsburgh. I had gotten I actually have a degree in chemical engineering, and I felt that I didn't get a real education. I could write lab reports. I could read and write technical things. And so I decided to go back to graduate school, partly so that I wouldn't get drafted, and partly because I really did want to learn how to read and write. So I was in Pittsburgh at the time, and I got a master's in history at the University of Pittsburgh, and then went on to get my PhD at the University of California in Berkeley. And I went to Berkeley because somebody spoke at Pitt about all about the politics here. I think it was about the City Hall, about the House Un-American Activities Committee protest and people getting washed down the steps at City Hall.
Okay, now what you distinguished yourself by being a photographer of those times. What got you started in photography? And tell us about the pictures you took of Berkeley in the mid-'60s.
Oh, well, I grew up in a house that was full of photography and photographers. My father was an avid photographer. He took home movies, and he had a dark room. Before I was 10 years old, I would go down to the dark room, and I still remember watching the images come up in the prints he made with the old enlarger he had. And before I was 10 years old, I was developing my negatives for my neighbors. My father showed me how to do all that. So I was, I was into it when I was very young. My father got me a camera. He gave me a roller cord when I was about 11, and a few years later he gave me a 35 millimeter camera. I still remember it, a Kodak Pony 135, which I really liked because you could take 36 pictures on a roll, and it was very easy to change the film and so on. And so I just, for some reason, I just kept up my interest in it. When I was in high school, a friend of mine and I photographed one of the things we had to do in biology, which fortunately I hope they don't require it anymore. We had to dissect a frog, and a friend of mine and I.
We did that in high school.
Do they still?
Same thing.
Yeah, well,
I don't know if they do in that. I think it's kind of inhumane, to say the least, but that's all right. Go ahead.
But a friend of mine and I photographed that in our class, And our biology, there was something called the Paul B. Mann Biology Congress, which was some kind of big deal, high school thing. And our biology teacher picked us to go there and present our slides, and that was photography. So I started,
wow.
Then and was rewarded for it, at least in terms of people liking what I was doing.
Did you think you'd do it vocationally someday?
Well, years later, I did. I think I tried to become I had an engineering degree at a time when you could always get work. It was in the late 50s and 60s. And in fact, the year before we graduated, the Russians sent up Sputnik, and we all applauded because we knew it meant jobs for American engineers like us. So
I'm assuming that was 1959 or thereabouts.
College, as an engineer in 58. Yeah, and this was 58 or 57, I think, when the Sputnik went up.
Okay, and how did you get from New York to Pittsburgh? That's what I want to know.
Oh, I got an engineering job in New York at the Armstrong Laboratory, which was the place where FM radio was developed at Columbia University, and there was a research project there, and it was only going to last a few months, but it was the first job that I got, and then they. In fact, Armstrong killed himself when RCA stole the patents for FM. But I wound up. I was doing a research project for the Pittsburgh Plate Glass Company, and when that ended, they hired me to work at their research lab just in the Pittsburgh suburbs, and I lived there for 3 years.
What was the adjustment like between living in Pittsburgh and Brooklyn, say, where you were brought up?
Well, I'll tell you the truth. Before I went, I was a bit anxious about it. I had just been married, and we were anxious about it. But it turned out that it was fine, although what we were surprised about was we did run into racism there. One of the things, funny kind of apartments they had in Pittsburgh was that you could go through. It was like we were in a 3-story house, and the landlord lived on the first and second floor, and we had to go up the stairs through his apartment to get to ours. At one point, a friend of ours was staying there, and she was dating a black man, and soon after she started dating him, we were on our way up the stairs, and the landlord came to greet us holding a gun, saying if we brought one of those, into the house again, he'd take care of us. And Whoa. This was in 1962. And so they had just passed some fair housing things, and we immediately went and reported it to the housing authority, and they sent him a letter, and the next time we came up there, he told us, you filed a writ against me, and he did pull out his gun again, and he said, and he raised our rent from like $85 a month to $300 a month. And so the following Sunday, so we immediately went to the housing authority, and they got us a place in some low-rent housing complex in Pittsburgh. I think it was called Robinson Court, if anybody knows that. And it was great because it was $85 a month, and we moved out on a Sunday while he and his wife were in church, and that was the end of it. And it was an integrated housing project, and it was actually run very well. We were in a 3-story building, and once a month, I think every 10 days, each of the 3 floors had responsibility for the outside of the building, keeping it clean and so on. And every 10 days, there were 3 apartments on each floor. Every 10 days or so, you had to keep, your floor. You had to take care of that. And it was very nice. We enjoyed living there, and it was inexpensive, and it was quite conveniently located.
Now, I mentioned you were from Brooklyn. What makes Brooklyn the most distinguishable city in the world?
I don't know. I'm not sure it is. Now that I've been to London and Paris and and other places, I'm not convinced it's. I enjoyed living there because as a child, I remember Brooklyn was very neighborhood oriented. You did everything in your neighborhood. It's where your friends were. It's where your barber shop was. It's where you picked up your newspaper at the corner store. I remember. In fact, I remember as a little kid struggling home with the Sunday New York Times every week from my father.
Right.
So, and public transportation was great because before I was 10 years old, I would get on a subway, and if you were under 12 back then, it was 5 cents. In fact, I think it was 3 cents for a while even.
I remember it being 5 cents when I was really young. I don't remember it being 3 cents.
I think it was 3 cents for a kid, yeah. And you could get a transfer. So I would get on the streetcar or the bus and transfer to the subway, and I'd be up at the Bronx Zoo, which was over an hour away by subway.
And it was the D train that you took, and the last stop where the Bronx Zoo was Bedford Avenue, if you remember that.
Yeah, I don't remember the details.
My grandparents lived right up there on Valentine Avenue, which was up in the top of the Bronx. You mentioned, we talked a while ago, and you said you weren't a baseball fan, but you acknowledged that the Dodgers leaving changed New York, changed Brooklyn, and you were talking about prejudice in Pittsburgh, which really surprises me. Is there any other town, any other city that could have accepted Jackie Robinson's entrance into baseball?
I have no idea. I really don't know. It's funny because I really knew very little about Jim Crow when I was growing up. I grew up in a neighborhood where I thought everybody in the world was Jewish. Jewish holidays, right. The schools all closed.
Right. Where did you go to high school, just out of curiosity?
There was James Madison High School, which, interestingly enough, Bernie Sanders graduated from 5 or 10 years after I did. And Judge Judy went there as well, I think.
Okay. I want to get into the differences between living in New York and living in California. What was the adjustment when you finally got out here in terms of how you saw the world, how you saw day-to-day living?
The biggest adjustment for me was having to drive everywhere. In New York, you could, the neighborhoods were very self-sufficient, and if it wasn't in your neighborhood, you hopped on a bus, a streetcar, or a subway to get what you wanted. And that included even entertainment. When I was a kid, my mother used to take me on the subway to New York, and we'd go to Lindy's for lunch and go see a movie. I remember seeing, we went to passing a movie while we were walking around, and there were all these teenage girls screaming because it said Frank Sinatra on the marquee, and they were called Bobby Soxers, and I remember they were wearing these white socks. So New York did have. I went to a lot of Broadway plays, and they were back then. You could go for $1.80, and my mother was really into the theater and movies. So I saw quite a few musicals and dramatic productions. In fact, I remember seeing New Faces, I think, of 1953 with Harry Belafonte and Eartha Kitt.
Eartha Kitt, yes. And Paul Lynde, I think, was in that.
That could be, but I don't remember,
Okay. But there were Broadway what they called matinees, where I think it was Wednesday afternoon, and coincidentally, my mother would take me downtown from Queens. We came the other way, but I got to see a lot of Broadway plays: West Side Story, My Fair Lady, Music Man, Milk and Honey with Molly Pippin. I don't know if you remember.
No.
The Yiddish theater in New York was the vogue in that time, and we grew up. We're lucky to grow up in New York. Culturally, we had the museums and the planetariums and what have you. What happened to your friends? Did most of them stay in Brooklyn, or did they go out in the world like you did?
I think later on, I know most of them left. I don't know. I might have been one of the earlier ones, although what was interesting about New York, one of the things was that there were, more than half a dozen free colleges. And so I went to a place called the Cooper Union, which was a privately endowed free college set up in the 19th century as part of some movement by wealthy industrialists to educate, quote, the children of working men, unquote. And Cooper Union was one of those, so there was no tuition, and it had a good reputation. It had both an engineering and art school. And I had to work. I commuted from home, and there was no tuition, but I did have to work to help support myself and pay for my books and so on. And I got a job in a department store for a while. And while I was, and I worked in the art school library, which corrupted me totally. They liked engineers working in the art library because they figured we wouldn't know the artists and wouldn't let them get away with fines. But I worked there on Friday nights, and nobody showed up. So I had a chance to look at all these art books, and I really learned art history for a couple of years. Every Friday night, sitting in the art library, going through art books, and occasionally I'd go on museum visits with the art students that I got to know. And I almost dropped out of engineering to become an art student, and my mother said she'd kill me if I did that. I had about 6 months to go to get my degree.
She pictured a beatnik.
Well, at that time, the way to get a job was to be an engineer. And, they couldn't afford to support me even when I was in college, I had to work.
Okay. Did you have siblings, Howard?
Yes, I have 2 brothers. And they both went to free college. My father got his master's from CCNY in the 30s.
City College in New York.
Yeah. And both my brothers went to Brooklyn College. One of them played basketball for Brooklyn.
Oh, really? My cousins went to Brooklyn College and became lawyers. So different strokes for different folks. Howard, yeah. I want to segue into something we both have an interest in, and that's basically the legalization of cannabis. We watched it happen here in Alameda, Northern California, for a long time. I want to know, what about Proposition 64, which was the legalization of it? What worked? What's good? What's bad? What can be done to make it better?
Well, I was eligible for medical marijuana before Proposition 64 passed, and I much preferred that, actually. The dispensaries, were less crowded, and it was much cheaper. Partly because I think there's something like 40% tax on it now. in Oakland or Alameda. So I think I think legalization is a good idea. If alcohol is legal, why shouldn't marijuana be? Why shouldn't it have been, for decades?
No question about that. The process, I was a medical marijuana patient as well. You didn't really have to be sick to be a patient, but it captured the spirit of the law, because the truth of the matter is the benefits medically are pretty hard to quantify. And I remember going in, they had little offices where you'd verify to a doctor that you were that you needed it, or what have you, or you wanted to get a prescription, and they put a doctor on the TV screen, and it was early remote, and he asked me why I thought I needed marijuana. I said, because I get anxious if I don't have any. So, and he said, well, that's good enough reason, anxiety. But that wasn't enough for people, like you say. That it morphed into legalization for everyone, and the restrictions, like you say, the taxes on the clubs, on what you buy from the clubs, make it difficult. And I just want to say that to you in the world, half the cannabis that exchanges hands are done in a scofflaw way. That there's a black market, that where people are out there not having to pay full amount, and but we've come a long way in that regard. So I can't really complain. I wish it were better. That's all. I always want things to get better in a hurry, and like I want the world to change in a hurry. How do you analyze what's going on today in today's world, Howard?
Well, I mean, it's just that wealth, has become so concentrated ever since, I guess, Reagan. Ever since Reagan became president, and the tax laws changed so that working people paid, far more of a share of the taxes, most of the benefits of which go to corporations, and largely arms corporations. The largest share of the biggest single item in our budget, I think, is for armaments and war. And that's all. It's $700, almost $1 trillion every year. And then they say we can't afford medical care for everybody. I lived in Canada for 30 years, where we did have, all you had to do was show a card. You got to see a doctor. And they say, taxes are terribly high there. Taxes, I don't know. They weren't substantially higher for me as a working person than they were here. And the difference was far less than what even now, I have Medicare, and it still costs us thousands of dollars a year to pay for what Medicare doesn't cover. Medicare does not cover everything.
Exactly, and if you break that down to pure facts, that 85% of folks, maybe not 85, I think it was 60% for this, who seniors who develop a cancer, heart problems, whatever, the unpaid part of what Medicare doesn't pay causes 60% of folks to go bankrupt. 60% of bankruptcies are because of unpaid medical bills. Let's put it that. I saw that figure too. It's very high. I know, it's crazy. And we are the only industrialized country that doesn't
have universal health care. I mean, even some non-industrial, some third world countries have it. So, I mean, it's really a legally corrupt society, and it's become more so.
And you know what? You mentioned something you mentioned Ronald Reagan, and you said things changed right about the time he was president. It changed the most for unions. I know you remember, if the audience remembers, that the air traffic controllers tried to strike, and
he fired them.
He fired them, right? Put them out of business. And that changed the tone of America, and it led to a great disparity of income between management, the bosses, and the working person. And I think it's our biggest problem. Although I get an argument, we got 12 things going on. I was just laughing to myself. I don't know how Biden gets up in the morning. With all that's going on, I think he's doing a terrific job, all things considered. But he's got his hands full. We got the Russians and the North Koreans and the Iranians, and it's just not an easy world that we're living in now. Can you make a prediction of an end game of how things are going to get better for us?
Well,
I'm an optimist. I'd rather give you that question and say, well, when is the bomb going to go off and destroy us all? I'd rather look to when are things going to get better, and is there going to be someone or some ideology that can take us there?
Well, I really don't like to speculate about the future. I mean, who would have predicted the pandemic? I don't think things are going to get more, let's say, better, maybe even, I don't think things are going to get very much more equitable in the near future. It just doesn't look like that to me. Even though, I mean, when Reagan put the tax on Social Security, and the Democrats at times had all three, branches of government, and they didn't remove it. And I remember Hillary Clinton and other leading Democrats talking about, what do they call them, entitlements. Even though we pay into Social Security and Medicare.
All our lives, they're investing our money.
Yeah, working people don't have real friends in either party. And in fact, I think it was in Wisconsin where there was this big government strike, the first time that the government employees there struck, and there were thousands of people in the city, in one of the government buildings there, and I think Obama was president, and none of the leading Democrats showed up to support those workers, So I think we sort of have two branches of the same party, where one, has a nicer disposition than the other.
Right, and but basically, it's stop the lines, change the labels each time there's a new election, because you're getting the same old elixir, but they just call it something different. And
right.
So, hey, Howard, I really enjoyed getting to meet you on your first appearance on Comfortably Zoned Radio Network. You're a terrific, articulate interview, and I hope you had a little bit of enjoyment, and I hope you'll come back someday.
Oh, I certainly did enjoy it, and thank you for inviting me. I was quite surprised.
My pleasure. I always look for the most interesting people to talk to, me being kind of a dullard myself. So, and you qualified as someone who's a fascinating guy, and next time we'll talk about California a little bit more, the adjustment between living back east. You lived in Canada. I want to know the adjustment, you made in Canada and how when you came back to live in the United States, how things have changed. But we'll save that for the second time you come back.
Sure. Look forward to it. Thank you again.
Too. Howard Harawitz, and
Harawitz.
Pronounce it Harawitz. On Valentine Avenue, where my grandparents lived, right around the corner, were the Harawitz family. They're the back of their house backed up to ours, and I remember that name really well growing up. But if I said, "Did you know the Harawitzes from the Bronx?" you'd laugh in my face because there's
very few Harawitzes, H-A-R-A.
That's what they were, H-A-R-A. Yeah. Well, they may have been Harawitz, as a matter of fact. The more I think about it, but I don't even know if they're still in the Bronx, and they don't care that I moved to California. So, but you do, and when this pandemic lets up, we'll get together and tell the audience you eat breakfast and brunch in Alameda, in the most scenic place that overlooks San Francisco. Where do you brunch on a normal basis?
Well, that's where we go. It's Mosley's Cafe. It's on the estuary at the foot of, what's the street that Mosley's is on? Sure, where you get there. Oh, Grand, yeah. If you just take Grand Avenue toward the estuary, away from the bay, and go to the foot of Grand Avenue, and then go left about 50 yards, you'll be at Mosley's Cafe. And they have a really nice breakfast. It's like Cheers.
Not only a good breakfast, but scenically, you can't beat it. I mean, we are.
And when you're, it's funny because we go there probably 2 or 3 times a week, and it's like it feels like Cheers because when we come there, they know it's where everybody knows your name, and they automatically get my usual breakfast ready. It's very and they're nice people. They're from Hawaii. The people that run it. I highly recommend.
I do too, and I just want to ask you one more thing. You post pictures of the '60s in Berkeley and the Revolution and the Black Panthers, and that's the age you photographed. Where can we find them? Where are they on display somewhere? Can we? Can you send a link?
Flax's Art Supplies in Oakland has an art exhibit sponsored by Studio 23 here in Alameda, but the exhibit is there, and a couple of my photographs are there. But for the most, I have a website, just Harawitz.com, 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 and we're working on a book of some kind for a nonprofit organization called Art Push that is going to publish it, and we're going to, and any any net income from it will go to it's a nonprofit that promotes art and artists.
Beautiful. You'll have to keep us posted about how things are going along those lines. And again, I thank you, and tell the audience it's Comfortably Zoned Radio Network, and I had a great time. Thank you again, Howard.
And thank you. I had a great time, too. Much appreciated.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Happy trails, everyone.
The proceeding has been a Comfortably Zoned Network production. You are advised to keep your dreams wet, your humor dry, your children and grandchildren out of military recruiting offices and off the laps of clerics who wear dresses. Thank you for listening, everyone. Happy trails.